You mentioned Professor Jordan Peterson, who has really found his fame through saying that the issues in terms of the radical left and their culture within universities is related to some version of what he calls a neo-Marxist postmodernism.
Well, it's not just neo-Marxist. Yes, everyone tries to get in on the party. Feminists, yes. Marxists, God knows who, will all go around mouthing that there are an infinite number of interpretations of the universe, and the people who try and rationally grapple with the universe are merely trying to get more powerful than people who don't. So he tends to link it to Marxism. There are Marxists who do that, but there are many Marxists who follow Marx, who said that there is objective truth out there. There's an understanding of the dialectic of history and why one society evolves into another, and what the impediments are in terms of realistic evidence that working people suffer. I mean, Marx wasn't a postmodernist. He merely thought that many dogmas were historically relative, which is true. And you can improve on that by becoming a learned person and recognizing which dogmas are merely suited to the ideology of a time and trying to find a sociology and a history that transcends that.
His contention is that Marxism is smuggled in through the back door and there's a few thinkers like this as well. Like, I think now it's the popular thing to talk about in terms of people like the neoconservative Douglas Murray. But Marxism is smuggled in the back door and is moved away from being around the proletariat and the bourgeoisie and around different groups and the power interactions between different groups.
Well, that does. Anyone who looks at reality will see that different groups vary in power. Nothing particularly bizarre about that. I mean, I'd far prefer to argue with a Marxist who thinks that truth is possible and is trying to argue for a position that you have to see ideas in a sociological context to deal with them, which is a truth of sociology, by the way, and who is convinced that history moves in terms of the invention of devices that serve human needs better, like the factory system. They, at least, you can bring evidence to bear because they assert something that's falsifiable. It's not falsifiable to go around and say everything is just a point of view. I mean, how can you falsify something like that, except to say, if you think carefully, no one believes it. Cultural relativism is a strange beast in itself. And if you look at my book, Fate and Philosophy, you'll see how quickly I deal with it. Almost no one is really a cultural relativist. You'd have to be a very peculiar person to say that you equally appreciated the music of all different cultures. Such a person is a person who never goes to a concert because they're torn in 50 different directions. But there is a lot of muddled thinking out there. And the less we have free speech, and the more we have making it a test of strength, the more that muddled thinking will flourish.
Do you think that departments like Women's Studies and Black Studies produce any thought that is worthwhile?
Oh, of course they do. People invent better techniques in surgery, and people find a better way of finding out when bridges will be stressed, and people find better ways of growing food. So there are a lot of vocational things that are moving forward very quickly. I mean, medicine today is much more scientific than it was 100 years ago. But when you get to areas that suit an individual to criticize their government, of course there's been progress in the sense that now almost everyone is literate. It's very hard to criticize a government if you can't read and write. But I don't think that the last 30 or 40 years of university education are developing critical intelligence in any way to the degree that I had once hoped.
Well, you can see it as a backlash as well. I mean, if you look at the history of African Americans, the ideological bent of Black Studies, which may seem extreme in some ways, and the activism within it, but it's been in response to something, though, hasn't it? A history of white supremacy, a history of slavery.
Well, the history of white supremacy should be looked at very carefully in the light of fact and evidence. It shouldn't be clouded by a lot of self-serving myths. There was a period after slavery that, for peculiar sociological reasons, black families tended to be more stable than white families. So to just run around and scream, black family instability is a legacy of slavery, needs more examination. There are many, the question of why women have a lower income and average than men is a very complex problem. You find, as Eric Fromm said, that almost any person who is in any way disadvantaged, their best instrument is the truth. You know, they have difficulty mustering the same power as their oppressor. But once they can become convinced that truth is on their side, they have an extra string to their bow. Discouraging the notion that truth is possible is not the way forward.